Hello children, welcome back to Yupp Master, and this is the second lecture of our NTSE Foundation course. Now in our last lecture we began with the chapter of cell, alright, cell, the unit of life, and we're studying the structure and the different functions of cells. Now in the previous lecture we covered all about the prokaryotic cells, right? So now we're going to be beginning with the eukaryotic cells. If you remember, we did the 5-kingdom system, which began with kingdom Monera, then the protists, the plantae, the fungi, and the animalia. So all of these are basically made up of cells. So when we're talking about the cells of a moneron, that is the bacteria, these are going to be those animals these are going to be those organisms which have a prokaryotic type of cell, where the nucleus in that cell is not very well developed. So we learned all about those in the previous lecture. So let's begin with the ones which are the eukaryotic cells, the ones which have a true and well-defined nucleus too. Alright, remember one thing, that when we're saying that the cell is a eukaryotic cell, then we mean that the nucleus is not only having a proper membrane bound nucleus, but it also is going to be having inside it, there will be nucleoplasm, and there would also be a nucleolus along with genetic material like DNA. So beginning today with the eukaryotic cells. Remember one thing, that when we talk about eukaryotic, well, the word eu means true and karyon meaning nucleus. Alright. Now in eukaryotic cells, we have both the type of cells, which would be, first we could include the animal cells, and second we also may include the plant cells. Now if you see here the basic difference between an animal cell and a plant cell, you have been doing these from your school days, but let's just say the basic differences. First of all, plant cells are the ones which have got these large vacuoles, and they also have the presence of a cell wall. So when we talk about the plant cell, we would see that there is a presence of vacuole and also of cell wall. Okay, whereas when we talk about the animal cells, over here the vacuole is going to be either very small or not present at all, and obviously there would be no cell wall in an animal cell. Alright, now along with these vacuoles and cell walls, these are two parts of the cell which I mentioned. So if I am saying that this is a constituent of a cell, then may I call this as a cell organelle. Okay, we can call this as cell organelle. Similarly, there are going to be so many other different cell organelles, alright. So starting with the outermost part, okay, we can label that as the plasma membrane, or if it is a plant cell, we can call it as the cell wall. So what we'll do is we'll start from the outermost part, and gradually we will go towards the center of the cell. And you know what the basic center of the cell is, or rather what the most important part of the cell is, that is the nucleus. Alright, so until we reach the nucleus, we will cover each and every of the cell organelle, whether it is a part of the animal cell or being a part of the plant cell. We will study the cell organelles, and we will also mention which cell does it belong to. Alright, remember one thing, according to the cell theory, every cell organelle is basically made up of the same components. So if I am saying that there is a plasma membrane in the animal cell, or if I am saying that there is mitochondria in the animal cell, then if I say that there is also mitochondria in the plant cell, then basically the mitochondria, whether it is an animal or whether it's a plant cell, it's going to be constituently the exact same constituents. Alright, so it's going to be basically made up of the same material. So let's begin with the outermost part of the animal cell, and that is none other than the cell membrane, or we may also call this as the plasma membrane. Alright, outermost part of animal cell, but this is not the outermost part of the plant cell. But yes, plant cells do have plasma membranes. Alright, just that it is not the outermost layer. Now when we talk about a plasma membrane, first of all, there is an alternate name given to the plasma membrane by Singer and Nicholson, and it is called as the fluid mosaic model. Alright, this fluid mosaic model, it's made up of a phospholipid bilayer. Now when I say that it is a phospholipid bilayer, what exactly do I mean? Bilayer means that there are two layers. Okay, so we'll see the bilayer part later on. First, let's try to understand what the word phospholipid means. Alright, so when I say that there is phospho and then there is a lipid part. Alright, so you just take an example, this over here, this is a phospholipid. Alright, now in this phospholipid part there is a head region, okay, and then there is the tail region. The head region here is the phosphate part and the tail region here is the lipid part. That's the part which is made up of fats. Now we see here that this is the head. I'll label this as head, and below that I'll label that as the tail. So when we talk about the head and tail of this phospholipid, we need to know that both of them are having different properties. Saying the properties of the head is having an important property, that it is hydrophilic. It means that it is hydrophilic means that the head is loving water. So head allows water to come inside. But when we talk about the tail is rather hydrophobic. So if I am saying that the tail is hydrophobic, phobic comes from the word phobia, which means fearing. So the tail is actually a part which is going to keep water away. Alright, so because head is being hydrophilic, as it said here, okay, hydrophilic head and two hydrophobic tails. So when I'm saying that head is hydrophilic, it allows water to come in. But then at the same time, having two hydrophobic tails is allowing water to stay inside at a proper level, does not allow too much of water to enter inside. In the similar manner, this whole chain of phospholipids, okay, this is one phospholipid. So there's a whole big chain of phospholipids, one near the other. That's exactly what you see in this diagram here, where this is a phospholipid and there are so many, there's a whole line in a series of phospholipids, alright. So the same way, that's one row of phospholipids, and just below it, if you see placed in an opposite manner, there is another row of phospholipids, okay, exactly the same. There is a head, and then there are two tails over here. The head is again going to be hydrophilic and the tails are going to be hydrophobic, alright. So this is the reason why, because of the relations that it's having with water, that's why this is called as a fluid mosaic model, alright. So each phospholipid molecule, again I'm reading the same point, has a hydrophilic head and two hydrophobic tails, alright. Now amongst with all of these phospholipid bilayer, okay, because there are two layers, 1 and 2. With this phospholipid bilayer, can you see that there are some proteins also embedded inside this layer? So you can see this one protein over here. You can see another protein over here. In fact, if you see this protein, you can see that it is starting above the membrane and also ending below the membrane. So basically this is a protein over here. Call this as a transport protein, and that transport protein is going to help in allowing any substance to either come into the cell, or if any substance wants to go out of the cell, then it has to be going past through this transport protein. Remember, the plasma membrane is basically forming the outer boundary of the cell. So if you want anything to enter into the cell, that has to be entering in through this transport protein. And if we need anything to go out of the cell, again the same passageway it is going to follow is the transport protein itself, okay. So this way there is not only one protein, but then there are three types of proteins, alright. One protein is the transport protein, which you know. Another protein would be like a globular protein, like this is here, but it's a protein which would be actually embedded outside or on the outer boundary of the plasma membrane. So I would call that as an extrinsic protein. Then there is a protein like what you're seeing over here, which is properly embedded inside the plasma membrane, and that is going to be called as an intrinsic protein. So we're going to be having three types of proteins depending on their location most of the time. That either it could be an extrinsic protein, or it may be an intrinsic protein, or it may be called as a transport protein, or you may also call this as a channel protein. Okay, it can be called as a channel protein. Alright, so let's see ahead. So here are the extrinsic protein, okay, because they are located outside, we may also call these proteins as peripheral proteins, okay, that's the first type of proteins there. The second type of proteins are the intrinsic proteins. These are the ones which are going to be found embedded inside that plasma membrane, and these may also be called as the integral proteins, or you may have the third type of proteins which are called as the tunnel proteins, or remember we gave another name to this too, we can also call these as channel proteins. Okay, we may also call this as channel protein. So 3 types of proteins, all right. So here's a closer look to this, a different diagram of the very same phospholipid bilayer. Can you see how it's looking like one big sheath which is arranged, where there is one layer over here and the second layer over here, and they are placed opposite to each other. Here is that hydrophilic head, and below it are the two hydrophobic tails, all right. Similarly, the one below it, hydrophilic head and the two hydrophobic tails, all right. Also, we can see inside these there are the different types of proteins. First is the one which is outermost protein. These, can I call this as the extrinsic proteins, okay. And then the ones embedded inside, you may call this as the intrinsic proteins. And then you have the other type of proteins which are able to go through the whole length of the cell membrane or the whole width of the cell membrane, and that is called as the channel protein over here, okay. Either you may call it as channel protein, or we may also call it as the tunnel protein also, all right. So let's see here, these are the 3 types of proteins present in the cell membrane or the plasma membrane. Now along with these two, okay, so we learned about the presence of the phospholipid bilayer, we also learned about the presence of the proteins, but there is a little bit more also when it comes to the plasma membrane. So look at this diagram here. You have the different phospholipid bilayers, okay, the second layer, and these are the tails. All right. Now along with all these, look at the different structures that you are able to see. Here are the proteins that we were talking about, the integral proteins, the channel proteins, all right. Along with this, do you see these green colored structures here? These structures exactly are those of carbohydrates, all right. So there are carbohydrates present too. Also, I'll tell you that there are fats present, means lipids are present too. And where are these lipids? Look at these over here. Do you see these yellow colored structures? These structures are nothing but lipid molecules, all right. So in the cell membrane, we have lipids, we have proteins, and there are carbohydrates as well, all right. Now, rather than the structure, more importantly would be the function of the cell membrane. So we see that this fluid mosaic model, which was proposed by Sindur and Nicholson, have various functions. So basically, just imagine when I'm talking about the function of a cell membrane or a plasma membrane, means I want to know what exactly is this outer boundary and how exactly is this outer boundary going to be helping the cell. Alright, so let's see what functions it produces. The first and the most important function, plasma membrane is the reason why any substances, especially like any solutes or any substances like that, that is the main reason why they are actually able to enter into or come out of the cell. All right, so let's come back to that point over here. Okay, so we see here that it is the plasma membrane which allows diffusion. What is diffusion? Diffusion means when any substance is going to enter into the cell or come out of the cell. But remember one thing, when we say diffusion, the diffusion process is basically a passive process where energy, or rather I can say ATP, is not being utilized. So plasma membrane helps in diffusion. Also, we see that in unicellular animals, okay, this plasma membrane, they form projections, all right. These projections that are formed, can you see that they are going to be helping in any substance to enter into the cell or any substance to come out of the cell. Now, it is a unicellular organism, which means that it doesn't have any opening, it does not have any closing, or doesn't have a mouth, doesn't have an anus, nothing as such. So how is it going to let food in? How is it going to let waste materials out? It's the plasma membrane that's going to be functioning there. So the plasma membrane is forming projections, okay, and those projections of the plasma membrane are going to be called as pseudopodia, all right, they're called as pseudopodia. So whenever any substance, whenever the pseudopodia is formed in such a way that it can allow something to come in, we can call this process as endocytosis. But then when the pseudopodia is formed in such a way that it can allow substances to move out of the cell, then that process is going to be called as exocytosis. So you have two processes which a plasma membrane can do in a unicellular organism. They would be either endocytosis or exocytosis, okay. So basically it allows the transport of chemicals in or out of the cell, and this we're talking about the unicellular organisms. All right. Now after this, it also helps in an important process which is called as osmosis. Now osmosis, whenever you hear the word osmosis, remember we're always going to be talking about water. And what exactly is osmosis? Osmosis would mean that wherever there is going to be solutes, okay, wherever solutes will be, water will go there, whether there is more solutes inside the cell or whether there is more solutes outside the cell, water would be going towards that area. So basically, if water wants to enter into the cell or if water wants to come out of the cell, who is it that's going to allow water to come in and out? It's nothing but the plasma membrane. So basically, the plasma membrane is helping in creating an osmotic balance also. Just like diffusion, even osmosis is a passive process, which means that the whole process of osmosis is not going to be utilizing any sort of energy. So energy is not utilized. Okay. When we talk about diffusion, diffusion is we're always talking about the solute particles. And when we mention the function of osmosis, osmosis is basically all about the water molecules. Okay. All right. Next function, the first function was diffusion. Second function we spoke about was about the allowing the osmosis to happen. Third function we're going to be speaking about. Second function we also spoke about in the unicellular organisms where they are forming pseudopodia. Next function we come to is active transport. Now, there is a basic difference between active transport and passive transport. What is that all about? So, when we say transport, okay, transport can be either an active process or transport may be a passive process. Alright, now active and passive, what's the basic difference between them? Active means that ATP is going to be utilized and passive means that ATP is not required. Okay, now in active transport, we may have either diffusion, Alright, so in active means there's going to be ATP used, okay, but passive would basically mean either it is in the form of diffusion, okay, or it is in the form of osmosis. Diffusion is basically about solutes, okay, going from its area of high concentration to its area of low concentration, and osmosis is basically all about the transport of water, okay, to an area where there is going to be high, wherever the solutes level is high, that is where water goes, and that process is called as osmosis. All right, so now let's come to the next function of plasma membrane, and that is active transport. So active transport, remember, it was all about what was utilizing energy. All right, so certain substances, generally whenever you want to travel or whenever any substance wants to travel from its area of higher concentration, okay, so let's say there is a substance where the area here is, the concentration here is higher, and if it wants to go to an area of lower concentration, okay, then at this time energy is not required, okay. But if I want to do exactly the opposite, if I want to make it go from its area of lower concentration to its area of higher concentration, then definitely here energy is going to be required, okay. So whenever any substance is going from its own area of higher concentration to its own area of lower concentration, we may call this as it's passing or it's following the concentration gradient. It's following the concentration gradient. But what about the opposite? If at all it's going from lower concentration to higher concentration, then we may call this as it is going as a flow of against the concentration gradient. Alright, so these were the plasma membrane functions. Alright, so the next function is going to be active transport, which we were talking about, where the chemicals are going to be transported from its area of lower concentration to higher concentration, which means that ATP is going to be utilized over here, and when ATP is utilized, then this is a transport which is called as active transport. Okay, this also is a function of the plasma membrane. All right, so summing it up, what were the functions of the plasma membrane? First of all, it does one basic thing, that it is going to separate the whole protoplasm. What was protoplasm? Do you remember that? Well, in the cell, okay, this is the cell, and if this is the nucleus, then this part was called as the cytoplasm. This part inside here was called as the nucleoplasm, and together, put them together, the whole region outside there is called as the protoplasm. So what is the cell membrane going to do? It is separating the protoplasm from the external environment. Okay, so it makes sure that whatever is inside the cell stays intact inside the cell only. All right. Next, this cell membrane helps in giving shape, giving protection to the cell also. It is a semi-permeable membrane. Okay, it only allows certain substances to enter into the cell and certain substances to come out of the cell. All right, with the help of which proteins? Do you remember those three proteins? Yes, the one which was helping things to come in and go out, it was called as the tunnel protein or the channel protein. All right, then there are many membrane proteins which we just spoke about. They may at certain times behave as enzymes and allow activities to take place. Because you know that any metabolic activities in our body, like for example photosynthesis, or for example respiration happening at any end, whether I'm talking about the plant or whether we're talking about the animals, all of those are going to be requiring enzymes to function. So many of these membrane proteins which are there, they serve as enzymes also. All right. Also, we see that they form pseudopodia, okay, in amoeba, means in any unicellular organism. For any food substances to come in or any waste to go out, it is the cell membrane only which is going to behave as pseudopodia. Remember, taking in was given a word which we called as endocytosis. Okay, it was called as endocytosis, or taking or throwing any waste material out was called as exocytosis. Okay, so you have endocytosis and exocytosis. All right. So that was all about the plasma membrane, right? So the plasma membrane, remember, it was found in both animal cell as well as in plant cell also. Now coming next to the cell wall. Remember, this is a cell organelle. Remember, all of these are cell organelles only. But the cell wall is an organelle which is found only in plant cells. Okay, it is restricted to plant cells only. It is absent in animal cells. In fact, this is one of the most characteristic feature which differentiates an animal cell from a plant cell. Now, when we're talking about the structure of this cell wall, okay, first of all, let's see over here in this diagram, what exactly are they showing? They're showing two cells which have placed near each other. This is one cell, this is the other cell. Okay, now both of these cells, what they're showing in between them is that this here, the green layer that you're seeing here, over here, and even over here. Okay, these two green layers which are placed very adjacent to each other, these are the respective cell walls of the first and the second cell here. Okay, now between these cell walls, can you see that there is a bridge? Okay, and this bridge is actually going to allow substances to be transported from one cell to another cell. Okay, so any substance which wants to go from one cell to another cell has to pass through this cell wall. So basically that cell wall has to have certain bridges or allow certain substances to pass through them. Alright, so this cell wall we see, where exactly are they found? They can be found only in fungi and in plant cells. They are absent in animal cells. Alright, also we see that these also, they are a protective semi-transparent covering, and inside it would be the cell membrane. Okay, the cell membrane that we studied here, if you can identify this layer here that you're seeing inside here, this would actually be the plasma membrane or the cell membrane. Okay, that is inside. And outer to that, okay, let's see, outer to that, this part here, okay, this is the cell wall outside to it. All right, so you have two layers here. Outermost is cell wall, inner to that, lining it, is the plasma membrane. Okay, now when we talk about this cell wall, it is basically made up of three layers. Okay, there is an outer, a middle and an inner layer. Now let's see the namings of them. The naming is a little confusing, so let's try to understand it. I'll tell you one thing, that the outermost layer of a cell wall, okay, is called as the middle lamella. Now, your next question would be, ma'am, if it is the outermost layer, then why is it called as the middle lamella? First of all, understand the word lamella means layer. Okay, middle lamella because that is the outer layer which will actually behave as the layer which is allowing it to connect with another cell. So when you have two cells put together, it is the outermost layer which behaves as the middle layer between the two cells, and that is why the outermost layer is called as the middle lamella. Okay, so this middle lamella that we see, it is a layer which is rich in calcium pectate. Okay, what is it made up of? It's made up of calcium pectate, and it is between the adjacent plant cells. So it is the layer which is found between two cells which are near each other. And what function does it do? It does the work of gluing those two cells together. Okay, so the middle lamella is the outermost layer of that cell wall, and it does the work of gluing two plant cells together and keeping those two plant cells intact. All right. Then inner to that layer, remember there were three layers. So outermost layer was middle lamella. The middle layer is going to be called as the primary cell wall. Okay, the middle layer is called as the primary cell wall. Now remember one thing, that this primary cell wall is always there. Okay, it is a thin layer, it is flexible, and it is extensible too, because it has to extend as the cell is growing. Okay, so outermost layer of a cell wall, middle lamella, inner to that, primary cell wall. Now if this cell or if this plant is a very mature plant, or if the cell that you're talking about is a very mature cell, then we would see that there will be one more layer, which is why when we describe about the cell wall, we say that there are up to 3 layers. Not necessary do we say that there are always 3 layers, up to 3 layers. Middle lamella, primary cell wall will always be there. But if it is a mature plant, then there may also be the presence of the secondary cell wall, okay, in a mature cell. So what is the secondary cell wall all about? It is present inner to that primary cell wall, and it is present only after the cell is fully grown. All right, that is when that secondary cell wall is present. All right. Okay, next when we talk about this cell wall, I told you that there were bridges that are present in between. If at all any substance needs to be carried from one cell to another. So in this diagram, let's try to first understand what this diagram is all about. This part over here which I am highlighting right now, let's color it in red. Okay, this part that I am highlighting here is actually the cell wall. Okay, this is the cell wall. Now, if at all I need to transport any substances from this cell to this cell, then there has to be a bridge in between. And this is the reason why the cell wall at different regions are actually having a gap between them. Okay, so this whole region that you're seeing here, okay, that region that you're seeing there, I'll color it in blue. This region is a gap which is there in the cell wall, and that gap is actually going to be allowing any substances to be traveling from one cell to another cell. Okay, that gap over there can be called as the plasmodesmata. Okay, what do you call it as? Remember this name, this is a very important name. That gap can be called as plasmodesmata or plasmodesma if it is singular. Alright, what is it doing? The main function of this plasmodesmata, it enables transport and communication. Okay, so enables transport and communication between two cells. Okay, for example, if proteins need to travel from one cell to another, if RNA needs to travel from one cell to another, any sort of nutrients need to travel, that traveling is going to be being done by the plasmodesmata. Alright, so communication between two cell walls is done by plasmodesmata. Okay, alright. Seeing ahead, what are the basic functions of the cell wall? Remember, we spoke about functions of plasma membrane too. Now moving ahead to functions of the cell wall. Cell wall functions, first of all, these are the layer, this is that outermost layer which is present in the plant cell. It helps in giving that plant cell rigidity. Okay, it helps in giving its shape. It helps in giving its support. It also helps in transportation of certain substances from one cell to another. What was that word called as where the bridge was formed? We had called it as the plasmodesma. Okay. Then, so it helps in transportation, and also inner to that, whatever constituents are there of the cell, it is protecting it, isn't it? So we can say that it is also doing the work of protecting that protoplasm. Okay. Alright, now, so we're done with the outermost layer, and that outermost layer was the plasma membrane. Then we did the outermost layer of the plant cell, and we called that as the cell wall. Okay, now we move on and we're coming to the third part, the third cell organelle. This is going to be present in both plant cells and animal cells. This is the major matrix of the cell, the main ground substance of the cell, you may call this as, and this is called as the cytoplasm. This is where each and every cell organelle is going to be embedded inside. Okay, now this cytoplasm, when we talk about, okay, the cytoplasm, if you see the properties of it, it is a jelly like substance. Okay, so jelly like, it's like as if you take a whole jello, put some gems inside it, so the jelly is behaving like your cytoplasm, and those gems that you put inside it, those are behaving as your cell organelles. Okay, so they have, this cytoplasm is basically a jelly like colloidal ground substance. Now what is the meaning of it being a colloidal substance? Colloid means that there's going to be solute and solvent both together, but the solutes are not dissolved in the solute, in the solvent. The solutes remain separate, they do not get dissolved inside. Similarly, inside your cell, there is the cytoplasm, and that cytoplasm has many particles inside it, but they are not dissolved inside it. So it is a jelly-like colloidal ground substance. Okay, the outer part, that cytoplasm also basically has two layers. There is an outer layer which is going to be called as the ectoplasm because it is outer, an inner layer which is going to be called as the endoplasm because it is the inner layer. Okay, also we see, unlike the prokaryotic cells, in the cytoplasm of a eukaryotic cell, the cytoplasm shows movements happening all the time. So there is a streaming type of cytoplasm. Look at this diagram here. This is the diagram of a plant cell. How do I tell that this is a plant cell? Because look at this here, the vacuole is extremely large. Okay, there is the presence of a cell wall, and these green structures are basically going to indicate the presence of chloroplast. So this is a plant cell. Now here we see that the cytoplasm which is there inside it, okay, it's going to be keep on continuously, it's going to be circulating. Okay, this is always circulating here, and this type of circulation happening inside here is going to be called as streaming movements, or you may call it as cyclosis. Remember, this property of cyclosis was not at all seen in the prokaryotic cell. This is a definitive feature of a eukaryotic cell. Okay, seen only in eukaryotes. Okay, so basically we see that the cytoplasm that is there, they have cell organelles. Okay, they have everything that's there inside the cell, it will be embedded inside this cytoplasm. whether we're talking about the cell organelles, whether we're talking about nutrients also, like sugars, like proteins, all of that is going to be found inside the cytoplasm. But remember that they are not going to be dissolved in the cytoplasm, and because they are staying separate, because they are not getting dissolved, that's why we say that the cytoplasm is a colloidal ground substance. Okay, it is a colloid where the solutes are not dissolving inside the solvent. Okay, so here we see that the cell organelles are there, minerals are there, sugars are there, proteins are there. Then there's also going to be the different genetic material like tRNA. Okay, then also there's the tRNA. What is it going to do? It's going to be transporting substances outside and inside the nucleus. So tRNA is there, vitamins are there, enzymes are there. Why do you need these enzymes? Because remember, I told you many enzymatic or many of the metabolic activities are happening here inside the cell, and those metabolic activities require enzymes, and those enzymes could be found in the cytoplasm. Okay, so that was all about cytoplasm. Remember the most important part here, where in order for any substance to be transported equally throughout the cell, okay, if at all you have food material, you have sugars, and let's say all the sugar is concentrated in one region only, can that help us? No. So we need it to be equally distributed throughout the cell, and for equally distributing that food material throughout the cell, that's why the cytoplasm here is basically going to be showing streaming movements. Okay, so that streaming movements is going to be called as cyclosis. All right, so there are cell organelles, there are minerals, there are sugars, there's proteins present in that cytoplasm, there is going to be tRNA, there would be vitamins, enzymes, everything. Remember one thing, it is a colloid like ground substance. Okay, all right, now we'll just give a brief introduction to mitochondria and the remaining major structure of mitochondria. Okay, we will be doing in our next lecture. Mitochondria, as you all know, is basically the main powerhouse of the cell. Why is it called as the powerhouse of the cell? Because this is that cell organelle where there is actually going to be the production of ATP. What is ATP? Adenosine triphosphate. This is actually the form of energy which is made throughout the body in each and every cell, and this is the reason why we are able to perform all of our daily activities. All right, so that's ATP. Now, when we say this word mitochondria, mitos means thread and chondros means basically granules. So this structure that you're seeing over here, okay, this is actually a cross or a cut section taken of the mitochondria. Can you see in this cut section that you can see different these thread-like substances? Okay, I'll color it in green, more visible. Okay, so these are these thread-like substances here. This is the thread-like, that's why it's called as mitos. Okay, and then you have those small granular substances. Alright, so those granules which are there, that's why the word chondros, and because both of these are present, we're going to be calling this structure as the mitochondria. Okay, how many mitochondria are there? And an average in each cell, there could be around 50 to 5,000 mitochondria. Okay, remember the shape of these mitochondria are always, they are rod-like structures. Okay, so mitochondria around 50 to all the way up to 5,000 in a cell. Okay, they are rod shaped, small granular structures. Okay, remember the presence of the granules. Okay, look at this structure here, an even better structure to explain the cross section taken of the mitochondria. Can you see how, first of all, you can see very clearly that there are two membranes here. Okay, there is an outer membrane which you can see in a dark brown color, and then there is an inner membrane which you can see around here. Okay, this whole layer, okay, are you able to, is that visible? Okay, this whole layer is the inner membrane. So remember, this powerhouse of the cell is having two membranes, an outer membrane and an inner membrane. Okay, now understand one thing, the inner membrane, okay, inside there, can you see how it is filled with this area? Okay, it looks like it is filled with a fluid, and that fluid is going to be called as the matrix. So inner to this inner membrane, the inner part to it is filled with matrix. Okay, also one important thing, the difference or the major difference between the outer membrane and the inner membrane is that the outer membrane is freely permeable. What is it? We can say that the outer membrane is freely permeable. Okay, and the inner membrane is rather semi-permeable. Okay, outer membrane is freely permeable, inner membrane is semi-permeable. So what do we see here as a result of this? That outer membrane may allow substances to come inside, but the inner membrane does not allow everything to be passed inside. So there's always going to be a proper balance maintained by these membranes, especially by the inner membrane. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to sum up here today, okay, so that we don't get too much into details for the mitochondria. So today's lecture, basically we gave an introduction about the eukaryotic cells. Okay, we started with the different cell organelles. When we teach when we're going to be learning each cell organelle, we will see whether it is present in an animal cell, whether it's present in a plant cell. We'll see those differences first. Okay, then we will go on to see what exactly are the basic constituents of that membrane, constituents of that cell organelle, and we also would like to see what is the function of it. So we began with the plasma membrane. Okay, do you remember the functions of the plasma membrane that we had done? Okay, let's go ahead and let's just try to recollect what were the functions of that plasma membrane. Remember, when we did the plasma membrane, there was a function like, first of all, there was the diffusion process. Okay, plasma membrane, I'll just write it down here. Plasma membrane. Okay, first function was diffusion. Okay, next function, osmosis. Third function, active transport. Right? Then it behaved as pseudopodia. For which organisms? For unicellular organisms. Right? Then we also saw that the plasma membrane was giving support and shape. Okay, then talking about cell wall. Remember, cell wall was present only in plants and in fungi. Okay, what was the name, an important word that we studied when we did cell wall? The bridge between two cell walls, wasn't that called as plasmodesmata? Bridge between two cell walls was called as plasmodesmata, allowing substances to be traveling from one cell to another. Okay, and then we moved on towards the cytoplasm, where that was basically a colloid. Okay, and it contained many substances like sugars, okay, like minerals, okay, like enzymes. All right, and we moved on towards the mitochondria too. Just a brief explanation or a brief introduction to it. So today we covered basically these three cell organelles. In our next lecture, we'll continue with the mitochondria and go ahead with other cell organelles as well. So do follow us and do subscribe to our channel, and stay home, stay safe, and